George R. R. Martin is known for writing some of the greatest female characters in fiction. Characters like Brienne, Cersei, Daenerys, and Catelyn are some of the most unique and complex female characters ever written. But how does George write such amazing and complex women characters? What's the difference between how George writes his female characters and how the MCU writes their female characters? Well, the answer is pretty surprising. George has given several answers to this question, so we'll just go down the list. But the answer that is the most easiest to understand is that George writes women like real people, and it makes sense. Women are real. They're real people. They're just as real as us men. And I'm not saying that just so my women audience put their phone numbers down in the comments and go on a date with me. That's only half of the reason. But jokes aside, George has explained this many times.
What was your intent in providing such female characters of strength in a genre that typically reduces women to witches, wives, and/or whores?
Well, to be fair, I have my share of all of those witches, wives, and whores, but I try to make them fully fleshed out human witches, wives, and whores, and as well to introduce other things. Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about common humanity. It seems strange that I have to say this. It's sort of a weirdly radical statement, but women are people, and they're driven by the same desires that drive men, I think. A desire for respect and power, a desire to protect their children, greed for money, for acclaim, everybody wants to be loved. It's all common humanity, and I just try to write my female characters as I write my male characters, I do take into account that it's a very patriarchal society, so they are limited to certain roles, and some of them fit comfortably within the roles that their Westerosi society has assigned them, and some of them do not fit comfortably into those roles, and therefore encounter a certain amount of rejection or tension or ridicule as they try to pursue their own dreams, or as they frustrate their own dreams. And all this is great. All this is conflict. It's character tension. It's what story is all about, the human heart in conflict with itself once again.
And I think that's what makes these characters so great. When you watch MCU or the new Star Wars, these women characters could literally just be replaced by men, and essentially nothing would change. You could make them transgender and essentially the character is exactly the same. And sure, sometimes that does work because Star Wars might not want to dabble into the whole differences between the genders. But factually, men and women live different lives to some degree, especially during the patriarchal times of Game of Thrones. During these times, women were essentially just property to be sold and nothing more. And men were either robotic warriors or evil elites. And even in today's time, women and men are still different and have to make different decisions. It might not be the exact same differences as back then in medieval times. Nowadays, men just have to worry about which Overwatch character to jack off to, and women mainly have to worry about if they should waste their money on the Taylor Swift concert or not. But obviously it's not just that. I know this might sound controversial, and I don't mean to be, but factually women have to worry about not being raped by Bill Cosby more than us guys do. Bill Cosby doesn't want our meaty ass. It's just a fact. So obviously George R. R. Martin knows if one gender has to worry about something more than the other, when you're writing about gender, it should be a part of the script to some degree. And it goes for men too. The expectations in today's world is also unbelievably high for men as well. To being a provider and protector and being told not to cry or complain about how hard your life is should be something to consider when you're writing a male character for modern day. But this video is about how George writes women, so I'm gonna make another video about how George writes men another time. And one way how George writes amazing female characters is that we do know George absolutely loves history. His boner for history is the equivalent of my boner for Overwatch characters. So George does take a lot of pages of history when it comes to writing his female characters.
Well, I drew much of my inspiration from history. If you read a lot of medieval history, like Westeros, it's basically a patriarchal society where women have quite restricted roles in society, and there are certain things that women are not allowed to do. And they're not allowed to be the Pope or to be a bishop or to have offices in the church. Depending on a country, in some cases they could inherit a crown or a lordship. In other cases they could not. That changed over time in various things. They were not allowed to enter certain professions. They were, the property of their husband or their father or whatever. All of these restrictions existed, and women had to function under them for many centuries. Nonetheless, various strong and powerful women still arose and affected the course of history. So there have been many strong women in history, even though the society was by no means an egalitarian one. And I try to reflect both things in my books to show a society that doesn't give women equal rights, and the frustrations and the pain and the difficulties that cause many of the women, but also to show certain women of strong character or ability dealing with that in one way or another, and what kind of accommodations they make with that, and how they succeed despite these restrictions, and the cost, because there's always a kind of a cost when you buck your social expectations.
So whenever George writes a story, he's basically Chief Keef. He keeps it real 100% of the time, and tries to keep it historically accurate. And believe it or not, this has bit George on the butt many times. If you're someone who only watched the Game of Thrones TV show, you probably think to yourself, yeah, Daenerys is like 18 years old and Jon Snow is also 18 years old. But nah fam, Daenerys is like 13 in the books. She's like what Jeffrey Epstein considers good age. And it's pretty scary to read her chapters. And George has been criticized for writing dark scenes to like 13-year-old girls. But the unfortunate reality is, this was the unfortunate reality back then. And believe it or not, in certain places of the world even today, women are still being sold as property even at the age of 9. This still does happen a lot. So as much as book readers are uncomfortable when reading a Daenerys chapter or a Sansa chapter, this is real life. And George tries to make his characters as real as possible. He tries to keep the story as real as possible. Yet I'm not saying this as like a stereotypical blue-haired person or whatever, it's just the unfortunate truth. And in case you're wondering, George also doesn't identify himself as a feminist. He says he always used to call himself a feminist whenever someone asked him, but George says the definition of feminism has changed over the decades, so he doesn't really know if he is one or if he's even allowed to call himself one.
Strong women.
Strong women,
Yes. Are you a feminist writer, do you think?
You know, this is a question I've been asked before. I keep giving a different answer to it every time. Basically, I believe that women are people. And I was very much in the 70s. I would have said instantly, yes, I'm a feminist writer, even though I'm a male. But I do recognize that I'm a male, and there's been a lot of waves of feminism. I don't want to. I'm hardly an expert on any of this stuff, so I'm sure there are women in the audience and perhaps even some men in the audience who know far more about this stuff than I do. But there have been changes in the feminist movement since the 70s to the present. And I've had some women in the subsequent years tell me I can't be a feminist because I shouldn't use that term for myself because I'm a male. That only women can be true feminists and men can just be allies. And, well, okay, I'm not going to dictate anyone else's terminology to them. I certainly don't want to offend anyone by calling myself a feminist if that's an offensive thing for a man to do. I don't know, you know.
And in that same interview, he does give a lot more information on how he writes women. The best one in my opinion that he said is even though characters like Cersei, Arya, and Brienne are all women, they all still react to things in their own way. For example, if Arya saw someone being beaten up, she would probably be scared and maybe run, but probably be brave to some degree, but also be really scared. If Brienne saw someone being beaten up, she would run and help the victim. If Cersei saw someone being beaten up, well, she would probably beat the victim up even more. George writes every woman like they're their own person, just like the men.
So, like I've sometimes asked, well, how do you write women? I don't write women. I don't sit down and say, now I am going to write a woman. It's like, okay, now I'm going to write a chapter about Brienne. What would Brienne think about this? I'm going to write a chapter about Arya. I'm going to write a chapter about Cersei. They're very different from each other. The way that Cersei reacts to something is very different from the way that Brienne is going to react to something. They have different worldviews. They have different beliefs. They have different upbringings that have shaped them in fundamentally different ways. You know, the fact that they have certain genitalia in common, it should not be the dictating thing into how one writes them. So that's what I try to do. I try to write individuals, and some of them are male, and some of them are female, and in some of my other stories, some of them are, you know, vampires or werewolves or creatures from other planets, but I'm always trying to write individuals.
So George writes women all differently, even though they are still women. Just like the male characters. Tyrion and Jon Snow are still men. They are still male, with probably 5-inch cocks if I had to guess. But Tyrion and Jon are their own characters. Tyrion is a dwarf and Jon Snow is a member of the Night's Watch. So even though they are the same gender, they live totally different lives. They have totally different goals and barely have any similarities. And Cersei and Brienne are both women, but they are leagues apart. Brienne is like a true hero who could save her life. Cersei would throw my ass off a cliff if I didn't say she was the most beautiful queen who has ever lived. And I love that. When I watch movies, shows, or play video games, a lot of the time, female characters can just be other female characters because all they do is kind of just stand there and that's it. I know this is historically accurate to some degree, and even in today's culture, there are some heartbreaking cultures and religions where women are not allowed to speak at like the dinner table. But again, in movies and shows and video games that are fictional to some degree, it would be much better if the writers actually made their women like real human beings. If you're having a hard time understanding me, I'll explain it like this. My favorite show in the world is South Park. And South Park has a character called Token before his name was Tolkien, which is incredibly ironic.
Why did you name your son that?
My husband has always been a huge fan of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
I wanted to name my son after my favorite author, but she didn't want to name our son J.R.R., so we just named him Tolkien. His name is Tolkien? Yes, you know his name is Tolkien.
I thought your name was Token. My name is Tolkien.
Sorry, I don't think it's that weird. J.R.R. Tolkien is one of the most prolific, influential writers of our time.
The reason why the South Park writers gave the name Tolkien is because of the stereotype whenever there's a group of white people and one black guy in the group, the black guy is essentially the token black guy. So those white people can say, nah, we ain't racist, man. The black guy in this group is like a brother to me. I have black friends, I can't be racist. And that's essentially what the media does with women that George R.R. Martin doesn't do. A lot of pieces of fiction just add a woman to a scene or a group, just because they need a woman in the background so the group looks more progressive. But that doesn't work in Game of Thrones. In Game of Thrones, whenever there's a woman, it makes sense for her to be there, whether she's a mother or a handmaiden, and in some cases, even whores. Now, like George said, he still writes whores in his writing.
Well, to be fair, I have my share of all of those witches, wives, and whores, but I try to make them fully fleshed out human witches, wives, and whores, and as well to introduce other things.
And in my opinion, the best type of female characters that George writes are these three. Mothers like Catelyn, Cersei, and even Daenerys, the mother of reptiles. The second one being outcasts like Brienne. And the third one is women who have anything to do with sex, like Shae and the women from Dorne. Don't get me wrong, I also love when George writes queens and arranged marriages. The way he writes Sansa is amazing. One of my favorite movies of all time is Titanic, and an abusive arranged marriage is a core part of that movie too. But because so many pieces of media write such good storytelling with arranged marriages, I don't think it's that unique to George Martin's writing, even though Sansa is one of my favorite characters. And George does do a wonderful job at writing arranged marriages. Like the scene where Tywin tells Tyrion to marry Sansa, and Cersei to marry the Tyrell boy. Sansa isn't even in this meeting. She literally doesn't even get a say.
And how do we do that?
We find Sansa Stark a different husband.
Wonderful.
Yes, it is.
You can't mean it.
I can, and I do.
Joffrey has made this poor girl's life miserable since the day he took her father's head. Now she's finally free of him and you give her to me? That's cruel, even for you.
You intend on mistreating her? The girl's happiness is not my concern, nor should it be yours.
She's a child!
She's flowered, I assure you. She and I have discussed it at length.
There, you see? You will wed her, bed her, and put a child in her. Surely you're capable of that.
And if I refuse?
You wanted to be rewarded for your valor in battle. Sansa Stark is a finer reward than you could ever dare hope for.
But the way George writes Catelyn as a mother is such great work. I'm not gonna talk about Catelyn's weird ass relationship with Jon Snow. I'll save that for another video where the whole video is me crying about how this woman bullied my boy Jon Snow his entire life. Unforgivable work. But Catelyn's dynamic with her being a woman and basically being on the battlefield, or at least on the war table, is George Martin's writing at its finest. In the books, it's a lot better, but in the show it also does do a great job. People are still going to her and be like, nah, women don't belong in the battlefield, they belong in the kitchen like my favorite red pill YouTuber said. And the dilemma works so well. And one thing I gotta say is that during this scene, where this dude wants to cut off Jaime's head because he killed his son, because he is a man, people are more understanding. But if he was a woman who wanted to kill Jaime because he killed her son, I imagine the misogyny, which is a word I've been trying to avoid using this video because of how overused it is, but I imagine because of misogyny, most of Robb Stark's men would just say that woman is overreacting. If the genders were reversed, that's how the scene would have gone.
And if you try and stop me...
You will strike me down? Have you forgotten me, sir? I am the widow of your liege lord Eddard Stark. I am the mother of your king.
And where is our king now?
You know very well. He has gone to the crag to accept the surrender.
Aye, gone to the crag. But not to negotiate. He brought that foreign bitch with him.
How dare you?
Outcasts are probably one of the most relatable things for me. I myself am seen as an outcast because I play as Hanzo in Overwatch, and us Hanzo players are some of the most hated people throughout the last decade. But Brienne is the perfect type of outcast, because if she had a penis, she would be on the Mount Rushmores of knights who are still alive. But because she wasn't born with a worm between her legs, all of her accomplishments are just seen as, well, she's not doing her job. Her job is supposed to be looking pretty and having babies and heirs. So Brienne is like, well, if I had a penis, if I had a BBC, no one would have a problem with what I do. That's kind of the point of Brienne's story. It's very similar to House of the Dragon, because in season 2 of that show, King Aegon doesn't have a dick anymore, which is the only reason why he sat on the throne in the first place.
Aegon's penis was destroyed when he was burned. Previously, Aegon called himself the Dragon Cock, but now he doesn't have a dragon or a cock. Aegon's penis is the whole reason why he became king. The Greens argued that Westeros must be ruled by the male Aegon, not the female Rhaenyra. But now that Aegon's son, Jaehaerys, is dead, and Aegon doesn't have a penis, he can't father a male heir. His heir is either his brother Aemond, who burned him, or his daughter, Jaehaera, and a female heir would be hilariously hypocritical. It's irony upon irony.
Now we're on to one of my favorite ones, sex and whores, or as we on the streets call them, hoes. This one is very obvious. Most male characters that aren't a part of the Night's Watch or like the Kingsguard, they can have sex with as many women as they want. But when a woman isn't a virgin on her wedding day, everyone loses their minds. And it's a huge theme of the story, and it's screwed up. Even in today's times, when men have a high body count, the man is a walking W. Thank you, by the way. But when a woman has a high body count, people think she deserves to be shamed and treated like crap. I mean, in the books, Tyrion not taking Sansa's maidenhood is a huge part of Sansa's story. But when Tyrion screws a bunch of women, it's only really a problem to Tywin and no one else. And one of my favorite characters in the show is Shae, and I feel bad for her the whole time. She is a prostitute, so if the whole world just shames her for being one and tells her she doesn't deserve a better life, then of course she's not going to feel like she can change her life if she wanted to. And I'm sure if Shae was a POV character, we would have heard a lot more about her story and how brutal her experience of being a prostitute really was.
I did everything he wanted. Whatever he told me to do to him, whatever he felt like doing to me. I kissed him where he wanted, I licked him where he wanted. I let him put himself where he wanted. I was his property. I would wait in his chambers for hours so he could use me when he was bored.
People will shame Shae for letting herself be put in uncomfortable situations because she lives a low-born life, but no one will shame the men for using these low-born women for their gain. So George is really good at writing like things like arranged marriages and the biased lens of intercourse with his characters. And I gotta say, it's something that David and Dan, the Game of Thrones show writers, they weren't really good at. They were the ones who wrote this terrible scene, which is the lowest rated episode in the first 7 seasons.
Reek, I told you to watch. You've known Sansa since she was a girl. Now watch her become a woman.
But yeah, I do plan on making a video how George writes his male characters because a lot of the fanbase thinks George is solely writing about women because he hates men or whatever, which is some like weird headcanon people have. But there's a lot of depth to his male characters as well. So yeah, one day I'll make a video how he writes his male characters, and I'll probably make an in-depth analysis on Shae as well, because she is really misunderstood. But yeah, that's it for this video. Like, subscribe, and peace.